Title: The Beautiful Thief. Consider Victor Halse, a man who once made the whole world watch. At 65, he has discovered the cruelest arithmetic of fame that audiences are not fans but creditors, and beauty is a loan that comes due all at once. Tonight, in a city that has learned to manufacture miracles and sell them in vials the color of expensive wine, Victor will find a solution to the arithmetic. He will not read the fine print. Most men of great appetite never do. What follows is a transaction conducted in a penthouse above the clouds in a place called, as always, the haunting area. The photograph had been taken in Cannes, 2019. Victor kept it on his vanity because it was the last one where he didn't recognize himself as old, where he could look at the image and believe for a full second that the man in the frame was still arriving rather than departing. White linen shirt unbuttoned to the sternum, jaw like a geographic feature. The woman beside him not Celeste, some festival creature whose name he'd already lost, leaning into him as if toward warmth. He stood before the vanity now in 2035 and held the photograph at arm's length, and then held his own face at arm's length in his mind. And the comparison was a kind of small death he performed every morning before breakfast. The skin had gone. Not all of it, not catastrophically, but enough. The jaw had softened into something administrative. His eyes, which journalists had once described as wolf-pale and unsettling and dangerously blue, sat deeper in their sockets now, hooded, bracketed by geography that mapped every drink and every sleepless location shoot and every marriage he'd saved and ruined in the same season. His hair was still thick, which his publicist called distinguished in the particular way publicists weaponize language to manage decline. He set the photograph down. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, new Shanghai spread to every horizon, a metropolis that had rebuilt itself twice in 20 years, first after the flooding, and then after the rebuilding, money ran out and private capital arrived with different ideas. The skyline was a forest of towers with living facades, bioengineered moss and vertical gardens climbing glass and titanium, the whole city breathing. 62 stories below, the streets hummed with the quiet electric murmur of a civilization that had agreed collectively to perform contentment. Victor had made 4 films in the last 8 years. 2 were good, none were great. The 5th was in development, which in his experience meant it was in trouble, which his agent said with a brightness that implied she was already shopping his replacement. His phone showed 17 messages. Celeste had sent 3, a photograph of their daughter Mara at her school recital, a note about dinner Thursday, and a separate, shorter message that said only please come home more. He read that one several times. He and Celeste had been together 11 years, married for 9, separated in the philosophical sense for perhaps 4, though neither had made it official because neither wanted to be the person who made it official. She was 41. She was raising their daughter with the competence and exhausted grace of someone who had expected a partner and received a boarder instead. His mother had left 2 voicemails. She was 87 and still called from the same landline in the house outside Lyon where she'd raised him, and her voice in the messages was thin as paper. He had not called back. He told himself he would call back. He had been telling himself this for 3 weeks. He opened the 17th message. Still interested? He looked at the message for a long time. Then he typed, "Yes, Dr. Renata Voss did not advertise. She did not need to advertise. Her clients were referred through a network so exclusive it made the Cannes guest list look democratic. A whisper chain of the extraordinarily wealthy and the extraordinarily afraid, which in Victor's experience were almost always the same people. Her office occupied the 44th floor of a building that presented itself publicly as a regenerative wellness center, because in 2035 that phrase covered a sufficiently vast territory that you could hide almost anything inside it. She was 50 perhaps, or ageless in the way that suggested she was her own best customer. She had the careful stillness of someone who had learned, through either discipline or chemistry, to waste nothing. Her office smelled of eucalyptus and something else, something that reminded Victor faintly of rain on hot pavement, ozone and earth, and the ghost of electricity. "I don't give the sales speech," she said, pouring 2 glasses of water with the economy of someone who treated every gesture as a transaction. "You've done your research or you haven't. And if you haven't, you shouldn't be here." "I've done my research," Victor said. "Then you know what I'm offering is real. You know it passed 3 independent biomarker panels, and you know it isn't legal, which is why you're sitting in my office instead of a clinic." "I know all of that," she studied him, not with the warm appraisal of someone who recognized him, though she did, clearly, but with the clinical attention of a mechanic estimating a repair. "You're 65. Baseline biological age, according to the bloods your cardiologist sent, is closer to 71. You've been hard on the instrument. I've been told. What I offer is a series of injections, 6 courses over 12 weeks. The compound works at the telomeric level. You've read about the approach, but what the published literature doesn't address, because the published literature is discussing something far more primitive is the transfer mechanism. She paused. This is the part most clients don't ask about, because they prefer not to. Victor looked at her steadily. Tell me. The biological clock doesn't simply reverse. It requires source material. Years. If you want to use the unscientific term, though the science is real, only the metaphor is imprecise. The compound draws from proximate biological connections. People with whom you share prolonged physical or genetic contact. The effect is diffuse distributed, and in small doses across a sufficient number of people, it's imperceptible. A week here, a month there. No individual person loses anything they'd notice. Victor processed this, and in larger doses, the transfer scales proportionally. Her voice didn't change. I tell my clients to consider their social geography, minimize prolonged contact during the treatment period. The effect radius is approximately 8 meters during peak metabolic processing, roughly 24 hours post-injection. She tilted her head slightly. Most of my clients have the kind of social lives where this is manageable. Victor thought about Celeste's message. He thought about Mara's recital photograph, Mara, in her red dress, 8 years old, grinning the gap-toothed grin of someone entirely innocent of time. He thought about his mother's papery voice on the landline outside Lyon. And the results? He said. She opened a drawer and slid a tablet across the desk. Before and after imagery, biometric overlays, the kind of documentation that would be irrefutable to anyone who understood what they were reading. Victor understood enough. He looked at the after photographs for a long time. When can we start? He said. The first injection happened on a Tuesday. Victor drove himself home that night and sat in his penthouse and waited, and nothing happened, which was its own kind of disappointment. And then at 3 a.m, he woke with such a violent cellular hunger that he ate everything in his refrigerator standing up in his kitchen in the dark, and by morning his joints felt like they'd been oiled by someone who actually knew what they were doing. He canceled Thursday dinner with Celeste. He told himself it was because Voss had recommended limiting contact during the first processing window, and this was true. He told himself it had nothing to do with what Voss had explained about the transfer mechanism. This was less true. He stood in his penthouse and watched the living city breathe outside his window and told himself that the amounts were negligible, that Voss had said a week here, a month there, and that everyone lost time eventually, and he was merely redistributing what was already being lost. He was very good at this kind of mathematics when he needed to be. By the end of the first course, he could see it. Not dramatically, not the canned photograph made real, not yet, but in the quality of his skin in morning light, in the way he came down the stairs with something that had been absent for years, a physical confidence, a sense of occupying his body rather than managing it. His cardiologist, seeing him for a routine appointment, said he looked well, said it with genuine surprise. He called his mother. She sounded tired, which he told himself was nothing unusual for a woman of 87. She asked when he was coming to Lyon. He said soon. He meant it in the moment he started the second course. Celeste brought Mara to the penthouse on a Saturday in November, 6 weeks into the treatment, because Mara had a school project about urban architecture and wanted to see the city from high up. And Victor could not say no to Mara. This was one of his few consistent virtues, that he could not refuse his daughter, though he was learning that presence and refusal are not the same thing, and a father can fail a child through abundance of love as easily as through its absence. They spent 3 hours together. Mara pressed her face against the window glass and named the towers by the shapes of their lights, inventing names for them, the sleeping giant, the broken crown, the one that looks like it's crying. And Victor watched her do this with a feeling he could only describe as receipt, as if he were accepting a delivery of something he hadn't ordered and didn't deserve but couldn't refuse. Celeste stood in the kitchen making tea, and she looked tired. Not dramatically, not alarmingly, but tired in a new way, as if a layer had been removed. Victor noticed and said nothing. He was 48 hours past his most recent injection. When they left, Mara hugged him at the door with her whole body. The way children hug before they learn that full-body contact is something adults ration, and he held her and felt the warmth of her against his chest, and something in him, something below the level of thought, flinched. He stepped back before she did. He told himself it was because he needed to be careful. He told himself a week here, a month there. After they left, he stood at the window in the dark, and the city breathed, and he watched himself in the reflection, and what he saw was better than it had been and not yet what he wanted. And he made himself a drink and opened his messages and did not respond to Celeste, which said only "Mara misses you" in the particular shorthand of a woman who was saying something else entirely. He started the third course. By the fourth course, the change was undeniable, and people were beginning to notice. His agent noticed first, not because agents notice things early, but because his agent noticed anything that affected market value, which made her reliable in a narrow and mercenary way. She called and said the team behind the fifth film wanted to push production up, that there was a new energy to him in the recent footage, That he seemed, she paused, searching, re-engaged. An interviewer asked if he'd had work done. He laughed and said he'd changed his diet, and the interviewer didn't believe him, and the resulting article was titled Victor Halse and the Ageless Question, which drove enough traffic to remind his publicist that controversy was still a form of currency. He was photographed at a premiere, and the photographs were compared, in comment sections he shouldn't have read, to the Cannes photographs. The consensus was, not quite, but close. Startlingly close. Close enough that the comments became the story, and the story became a feed, and the feed became a small, sustained resurrection of the name Victor Halse in the cultural metabolism of people who had begun to think of him in the past tense. He stood in the mirror each morning, and the man who looked back was arriving again. He called his mother. Her housekeeper answered and said she was resting more than usual, that the doctor had adjusted her medications, that she had good days and difficult days. Victor said he would visit soon. The housekeeper was too professional to register disbelief. He visited Mara on her 9th birthday. She was still Mara, still gap-toothed, and still naming the city's towers through the glass, but something in her coloring seemed faded, or perhaps the light was different, or perhaps he was looking for it and finding it in innocent variation. He brought her the elaborate mechanical toy she'd asked for, a climbing robot of her own design that she'd sketched and sent him 3 weeks ago, and she forgot about everything else for an hour, and Victor watched her play and drank his drink and told himself that children were always tired on their birthdays from the excitement of them. Celeste walked him to the elevator. "She's been getting headaches," she said. "The pediatrician says it's nothing, but she's been getting headaches." "Kids get headaches," Victor said. Celeste looked at him. Not with anger, they were past the season of anger, but with the steady, tired gaze of someone taking an inventory. "You look incredible," she said. "I don't mean it as a compliment." The elevator opened. He stepped in. "How?" she said. "Diet," he said, and watched the doors close between them. He went to Voss after the 5th course and asked her to increase the concentration. She was quiet for a long moment. She refilled his water glass with that same economic precision. "The standard course achieves a 15 to 20-year reversal over 12 weeks, she said. "You're asking for, I want to finish at 45, he said. 40, ideally. That would require doubling the concentration in the final course. The transfer volume would increase proportionally. I understand that. Do you?" She looked at him with an expression he hadn't seen on her before, not quite concern because he didn't think concern was a dominant feature of her emotional architecture, but something adjacent to it. Something that might have been, in a different person, the precursor to a refusal. "Who are you in prolonged contact with?" He thought of Celeste's tired face. He thought of Mara's headaches. "I'm careful," he said. She was quiet again, longer this time. Then she wrote the prescription. He was between courses when his agent called about Leon. His mother had fallen. Hip, which at 87 was the kind of news that arrived wearing ordinary clothes and carried extraordinary weight. The housekeeper said she had been confused in the days before the fall, not dramatically, not alarmingly, but in a new way, losing threads she would have held before. The hospital was good, the care was attentive. His mother was stable, but stable was doing considerable work in that sentence, and Victor understood what work it was doing. He flew to Lyon. She was in the hospital room when he arrived, small, as she had always been, but newly, disturbingly small, as if something had been subtracted from her between his visits. Her hands on the blanket were the hands of someone very old, mapped with the raised roads of tendons and veins, and he took them and they were cold in the particular way of hospital rooms, and she looked at him. Her eyes were still hers. That was what he held on to. The eyes were still entirely hers, dark, sharp, seeing through him as she had always seen through him since childhood, since the first time he'd tried to hide something from her and she'd looked at him across a table in Lyon with the calm confidence of a woman who had made him and therefore owned the patent on his evasions. "You look younger," she said. Her voice was tissue paper thin, but the irony in it was structural load-bearing. "Every time I see you, you look younger." "You look good," he said, which was a lie, and she knew it and he knew she knew it. "I feel old," she said. "I feel very suddenly old, more than I should, I think." She turned her head toward the window. Outside, Lyon was gray and winter plain and real in the way that things far from biotech metropolises remain real. "You were always going to find a way," she said, not unkindly. "You were always the one who couldn't accept the deal." "What deal?" "The one everyone accepts," she said. "The one where you get to be here for a while, and then you don't, and while you were here, things cost what they cost." She closed her eyes. "But you were always looking for a better price." He sat with her for 3 hours. He held her hand. He told himself the radius was 8 meters and he was keeping his distance, but he was holding her hand, and the hand was cold, and warmth flows from warm to cold as a matter of physics, and he was the warm one now, radically, artificially warm, a furnace built on borrowed fuel. He flew back before the sixth course. He did not look at himself in the airplane window. The sixth course, doubled concentration, took 11 days. He understood afterward, reconstructing the timeline in the private archive of his memory, the way you sometimes understand a story better on the second read, that he had understood for some time. Not consciously. Consciously, he had maintained the mathematics, the careful distributed arithmetic of a week here, a month there. But at some level below consciousness, below the reach of self-persuasion, he had known. The way you know a sound is wrong before you can identify it, the way a room feels empty before you turn around. Celeste called on the 12th day. Her voice was different, not older, not dramatically, not in a way a stranger would notice, but he had listened to her voice for 11 years, and he heard it. Something had gone slightly dry, slightly careful, like a document that had been photocopied once too many times. Mara's headaches are back, she said. I'll call her pediatrician, he said. Give me the number. Victor. A silence. The pediatrician says she's fine. The blood work is fine. But she looks... Another silence, longer, the kind that people fill with sentences they decide not to say. She has gray in her hair, Celeste said. Mara has gray in her hair and she's 9 years old. They took blood. They said it's nothing. But Victor... He was standing at his window. The city breathed below him. He was looking at his reflection, which was the reflection of a man who was 45 or close enough, or perhaps 43, the Cannes photograph not quite made real, but almost. The wolf-pale eyes clear and lit and present. The jaw reassembled. The man who had been arriving. Victor, Celeste said. I'll be there in the morning, he said. He set the phone down and stood at the window for a very long time. He went to Voss. Not for another course, he understood he was past wanting that, or rather, he understood that wanting it was exactly the mechanism. That desire was the compound's real delivery system, that you could dress a hunger in the language of self-improvement, and it would be no less hungry. He went because he needed to ask. Is it reversible? He said. She looked at him across her eucalyptus-scented office. The rain on pavement smell was there again. She folded her hands on the desk with careful deliberation. The compound's action is permanent, she said. In both directions. In both directions. He sat with this. My daughter has gray in her hair. Voss was quiet. She's 9 years old, he said. I told you to manage your proximity. She's my daughter, he said, and something in his voice, something that had not been in his voice for a long time, perhaps years, perhaps as far back as the man in the Cannes photograph, broke the sentence open and left it raw. Voss looked at him, and her face did something complicated and private. The transfer is diffuse at the concentration we used, she said. Across enough proximate contacts, the individual effect is, what did I take from her? Victor said. Specifically. What did I take? Voss was quiet for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was precise and careful and utterly without comfort. At doubled concentration, with the contact hours you described, the transfer from any single proximate contact would be... She did a calculation that was clearly not new, that she had done before, perhaps many times, in this office, above this quiet city. Approximately 4 years. Perhaps 5. Victor looked at his hands. They were the hands of a younger man. They were, he understood now, not his hands in any sense that the word his should be permitted to carry. They were borrowed, seized, really, from people who had not been asked and had not agreed and had trusted him in the specific, irreducible way that a child trusts a parent and a mother trusts a son. And my mother, he said. I don't know your mother's contact hours. She's 87, he said. She fell. She's confused. She aged in a month. She aged as if years had... He stopped. He stopped because the arithmetic was completing itself in his mind, and the answer it was reaching was one he had been calculating away from for months, using every instrument of self-deception he possessed, and the instruments had run out. He stood up. He left the office. He did not ask Voss anything else because there was nothing else to ask. The vial of the 7th course she'd already prepared sat on her desk in his peripheral vision as he walked out, small and wine-dark and gleaming, and he did not look at it. He went down 44 floors and stood in the quiet electric murmur of the street below the living city and called Celeste. I'm coming home, he said. Victor, I need to explain something, he said. I need to explain it to you, and I need to explain it to Mara, and then I need to... He stopped. He had been about to say fix it and understood he could not say this because it was not true, and because Voss had already told him it was not true, and because the years that had been taken were taken in time moved in one direction only, which was the deal, which was the one everyone accepted, which was the thing he had spent 65 years and a fortune refusing. I'll be home in an hour, he said. He He stood in the street. The city around him was rebuilt and rebuilding, full of people who had accepted the deal in various states of grace and gracelessness, growing old in the ordinary human manner that he had decided was insufficient, and had found a way to circumvent and had discovered, in the way that the zone always arranges its discoveries, that circumvention and theft are the same word in the original language. He looked at his reflection in a darkened shop window. The man who looked back was 45, or close enough. He was arriving. He was lit and clear-eyed and present and precise, assembled from the ingredients of his wife's next 5 years and his daughter's gray hair and his mother's confused and accelerating twilight. He looked like the Cannes photograph. He looked like the most expensive thing he'd ever purchased. He looked away. He sold the penthouse 6 months later. He moved to Lyon. Not permanently, he told himself, though he was already beginning to understand that the things we tell ourselves not permanently are often the most permanent of all. His mother was in a care facility 20 minutes outside the city, in a room with a window that looked onto a garden that was dormant in winter but would, she told him on his visits, be extraordinary in spring. He visited every day. She knew him, which was the thing he held onto. She knew him, and when he came she looked at him with those dark eyes that still held the same irony and sharpness, even now, even having arrived somewhere far past 87 by means he could not allow himself to not acknowledge. She had not forgiven him because he had not told her the whole truth, only enough of it that she looked at him sometimes with an expression that said she had assembled the rest herself, as she had always assembled the rest herself. Mara's gray had not spread. The pediatrician at the follow-up said she'd never seen anything like it, a cluster of depigmented follicles, localized, stable, not progressing. She called it a curiosity. Mara called it her lightning streak and wore it with the casual authority of a 9-year-old who had not yet learned to be ashamed of the marks that life puts on a person. Victor looked at it every time he saw her and felt the knowledge of it, not the guilt, which was too clean a word, but the knowledge, which was a different thing. Heavier and more permanent, a stone he would carry in the specific shape of his particular failures. Celeste knew everything. He had told her everything in the hour he'd promised on the phone, sitting in their kitchen in the apartment she'd made into a home while he was busy making himself into an image. She had listened with the stillness of someone receiving news they had been expecting and dreading simultaneously. She had not asked him to leave. She had not asked him to stay. She had sat with the knowledge for several weeks and then said, one morning over coffee, I want to know if you feel it, what you took. I want to know if it's in you somewhere, what it cost. He had thought about this carefully. Yes, he said. Tell me what it feels like. Like wearing something that doesn't belong to me, he said. Like a coat that fits perfectly and is made from something I should not have. She looked at him over her coffee cup. Her face at 41 was still beautiful and slightly more tired than it should have been, and he saw this every morning, and it was the clearest mirror he had ever looked into. Good, she said. It was not forgiveness. It was something smaller and more specific, the acknowledgement that he was, at least, correctly and accurately, and permanently aware of what he had done, which was not absolution but was perhaps a precondition for it one day in some spring that hadn't arrived yet. He was, for the first time in 40 years, not working to fix his face. He was 45 in the mirror, or thereabouts. He would be 45 in the mirror for the rest of his life, however many years remained of a life built, in part, from the years of others, and every morning he would see the Cannes photograph made real and know the price printed on the back of it, which Cannes had not known and the photograph had not shown, and he had worked very hard, for a very long time, not to read. In Lyon, the garden outside his mother's window waited under its winter earth for spring. He waited with it. Victor Halse got exactly what he paid for. He is 45 and will remain so, a monument to a transaction conducted in private, a man who found the one door in the universe that opens inward and walked through it without checking what was on the other side. What he did not anticipate, what nobody who has ever mistaken appetite for need has ever anticipated, is that the receipt follows you. It is printed on the people who loved you. It is in the ledger where these things are recorded, non-negotiable and permanent. Perhaps the cruelest tax on the dream of eternal youth is simply this: you must live long enough to understand it. Consider this a cautionary tale from the haunting area, a place where the fine print is always legible, always accurate, and always read exactly one transaction too late.